The rain fell heavily against the tall glass tower of Novatech, each drop striking the surface like a reminder that even the strongest structures could tremble. Inside the 37th floor, the lights from hundreds of computer screens reflected against the polished marble floor. The hum of servers filled the air with a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to echo through the building. On one massive screen, a line of red letters blinked repeatedly. It read, "Aurora system failure. Loop detected." It was supposed to be a night of triumph. Valeria Stone had spent years building toward this moment. She was the youngest female billionaire in Manhattan, a genius who had turned a small research startup into one of the most powerful technology empires in the world. Her name was known everywhere, and her words carried the weight of money and ambition. Yet tonight, her confidence looked fragile. She stood at the head of the table in the conference room. Her white suit was perfect, but her expression was sharp and cold. The people around her, the best engineers in the company, waited for her to speak. "This is not happening," she said quietly. "Not tonight." No one dared to reply. The air in the room felt heavy. Alan Price, the lead engineer, finally gathered the courage to speak. His voice trembled. "We are trying everything we can, Miss Stone. The AI system keeps locking itself. Every time we reset, it runs the same command again. It refuses to stop." Valeria's eyes darkened. "Do you know why?" "Do not think," she interrupted. "No." Alan swallowed and looked back at the screen. Lines of code scrolled faster than his eyes could follow. Each attempt to correct the problem only created another loop, trapping the system inside itself. If AURORA failed, it would destroy the company's reputation. Investors would panic. The launch would collapse. Valeria could already imagine the headlines calling her empire a fraud. She pressed her fingers against the glass table, once, twice, each sound as sharp as breaking ice. "Anyone who can fix this tonight," she said, "will get $100 million. The engineers stared at her in silence. Then someone at the far end of the room laughed nervously. No one believed her. 100 million was a number too large, too impossible, but Valeria's face remained cold and serious. Outside the conference room, a janitor was cleaning the floor. His name was Mark Davis. He moved quietly, pushing a cart filled with mops and cleaning bottles. His uniform was dark blue, his hands rough from work. He did not belong to the world behind the glass walls, but he heard every word. In the hallway near him, a little girl sat on a wooden bench, her legs swinging back and forth. She was drawing in a small notebook filled with scribbles and numbers. Her name was Lily. She was 9 years old, and she waited for her father to finish his night shift. Mark looked at her and smiled. He had once been a software engineer, before the layoffs, before the long nights in hospitals, before life had taken everything but her. He took the janitor job because it was steady, and because he could bring his daughter with him when the babysitter canceled. Through the glass wall, Lily could see the glowing code on the giant monitor. The red letters fascinated her. She tilted her head, squinting. "Dad," she whispered, "I think they wrote the loop wrong." Mark stopped wiping the floor. "What do you mean, honey?" "It just keeps calling itself," she said. "It never stops to ask why. It needs a question, or it will keep running forever." He smiled softly. "You are seeing patterns again, just like your mom used to." "But look," she insisted, pointing at the screen. "That red line, the one flashing again and again. It tells the computer to repeat, but it never asks if it should." Mark followed her gaze. He could not see the entire code, but the child was not wrong. It sounded exactly like a recursive loop with no exit condition, a mistake so simple that no professional programmer should have missed it. Before he could say anything, the door opened and a man in a black suit stepped out. He frowned when he saw Mark and the girl. "Hey, you cannot stand here. This area is restricted." "Sorry," Mark said quickly, pulling his cart back. "Move along," the man ordered, closing the door behind him. Lily looked up at her father. "Why are they angry?" "Because they are scared," he said. "People who have too much to lose stop listening." She frowned. "But if I can see it, why can't they?" Sometimes grown-ups build walls inside their heads, he said softly. They forget how to look simple. He tried to return to his work, but his hands would not move. Through the glass, he saw Valeria pacing near the screen. The engineers looked desperate. The storm outside roared louder. Then something inside him decided. Mark pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "Excuse me," he said quietly. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. The room fell silent. Valeria's cold gaze found him instantly. "Yes," she said slowly. "I am sorry to interrupt," he began, holding his cap in both hands. "But my daughter..." She was looking at the code from outside. "She thinks she might know what is wrong." The silence deepened. Someone near the window laughed softly. "Your daughter," Valeria repeated. "Yes, ma'am. She is 9. More laughter followed. One of the engineers whispered, "This is absurd." Valeria lifted her hand, and the sound stopped. Her voice was calm. "Bring her in." Mark blinked. "Are you sure?" "I am offering $100 million, she said coldly. "At this point, I will take a miracle or a child, whichever comes first." Mark nodded, stepped back into the hallway, and motioned for Lily. She clutched her notebook nervously. "They want me to come in?" "Yes, sweetheart. Just tell them what you saw." Lily walked into the room, her small shoes tapping against the floor. The engineers stared as she climbed onto a chair. She looked at the code, her eyes wide and curious. "Hi," she said softly. "I think your program is looping because it does not ask why it is doing the same thing." Alan laughed under his breath. "Excuse me, little one." Lily pointed at the red section of code. "This part calls itself over and over. It never checks what started it. It should stop and ask first." Valeria leaned forward slightly. "And what should it ask?" "It should ask why," Lily said simply. "If it knows the reason, it can decide if it should keep going or stop." For a moment, no one moved. Then Valeria's assistant whispered, "She is talking about a context gate." Alan frowned and turned back to the keyboard. "Wait. She is right. The parser is confusing the guard with an instruction. It keeps calling itself." "Can we fix it?" Valeria asked. "We can try," Alan said carefully. "Do it." Alan opened a test environment. Lily watched closely, her eyes glowing. She pointed where the logic needed to change. "Rename this gate so it cannot be mistaken. Add a question here. Make it ask for a reason before it runs again." The engineers hesitated, but followed her instructions. The code shifted. The error light blinked once, then twice, then disappeared. The green letters appeared on the screen. "System restored Aurora, online." The room erupted into applause. Some people shouted. Some just stared in disbelief. Valeria stood still, watching the girl with something like awe in her eyes. "What did you just do?" she asked quietly. "I fixed the loop," Lily said, smiling shyly. Mark felt his heart swell. He had seen many things in life, but nothing like this. Valeria looked from the child to her father and back again. "I said I would pay $100 million to whoever fixed it," she murmured. "It seems I owe you." No one laughed now. The storm outside had ended, and the city lights glowed across the glass walls. For the first time in years, Valeria Stone felt something she had forgotten existed. It was not fear or victory. It was humility. And as she looked at the janitor and his daughter, she realized that sometimes the simplest question in the world can change everything. That night, in the heart of the glass tower, a machine was repaired. A promise was made. And 3 lives quietly shifted toward a new beginning. Morning came quietly over the city. The sky above Manhattan was pale blue and fragile, as if the storm from the night before had washed the world clean. Inside Novatech headquarters, the air was lighter. Employees whispered in the halls about what had happened. A 9-year-old girl had fixed the company's greatest crisis. Some people laughed. Some doubted. And others said it was a miracle. But one person did not laugh. Valeria Stone sat alone in her glass office, staring at her reflection in the window. She had not slept. Her mind kept replaying the scene. The janitor, the little girl, the lines of code flashing from red to green. For years, She had believed she understood everything about success. Power came from precision, control, and the courage to demand perfection. But last night, a child had reminded her of something older and truer. Curiosity, wonder, the courage to ask why. She turned away from the window and pressed a button on her desk. Her assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Bring Mark Davis and his daughter to my office," she said. The assistant hesitated. "The janitor and his daughter?" "Ma'am?" "Yes," Valeria said firmly. "The janitor and his daughter." When they entered a few minutes later, the difference between them and their surroundings was almost painful. Mark stood near the doorway, hat in hand, shoulders tense. His uniform was clean but faded from years of use. Lily clutched her small notebook like a shield. Valeria gestured toward the sofa. "Please sit," she said. Mark cleared his throat. "Thank you, ma'am. I just want to say we did not mean to interrupt last night." "She was just curious," Valeria interrupted him gently. "Do you know what you and your daughter did last night, Mr. Davis?" "We were just lucky," he said quietly. "No," Valeria replied. "You reminded me that brilliance does not always wear a badge." Lily smiled shyly. "I just saw the question that was missing." "Exactly," Valeria said. "And because of that, this company is alive today." She reached for a folder on her desk and placed it in front of Mark. Inside was a contract, printed on heavy paper. Mark hesitated before touching it. "This is what I promised," Valeria said. "The reward." Mark's eyes widened. "Ma'am, that cannot be right." "It is," she said calmly. "I am a woman of my word." Mark shook his head. "We cannot take this. It is too much." Valeria studied his face. She saw honesty there, and a kind of pride she had not seen in years. Most people around her were hungry for money, status, and power. But this man only wanted enough to keep his daughter safe. "Then what do you want?" she asked softly. Mark looked at Lily before answering. "I just want her to have a chance. She learns fast, but I cannot afford the kind of education she deserves." Valeria leaned back in her chair. A quiet smile touched her lips. "Consider it done," she said. "I will personally fund her education, every level, from now until university." Mark's voice cracked. "I do not know how to thank you. Just keep teaching her to see the world as she does now," Valeria said. "That will be enough." Lily's eyes shone. "Does that mean I can come back here again?" Valeria laughed softly. "Only if you promise not to fix everything before the engineers have their coffee." They all laughed together, the sound breaking the tension that had filled the room. For the first time in a long while, Valeria felt something close to peace. Later that afternoon, Valeria called a company-wide meeting. The employees filled the auditorium, whispering as she walked to the stage. Cameras flashed. Reporters waited near the back. She stood under the bright lights, her usual armor of confidence replaced by a quiet steadiness. "Last night," she began, "we faced a failure that could have destroyed us. But we were saved by someone none of us expected." She paused and looked toward the side of the stage, where Mark and Lily stood. The crowd followed her gaze. This young girl reminded us of something important. Innovation is not about arrogance or wealth. It is about curiosity, courage, and the willingness to ask why. The audience applauded. Some of the engineers looked embarrassed, others thoughtful. Valeria continued. "I have decided to create a new program here at Novatech. It will be called the AURORA Fellowship. It will give opportunities to children from ordinary families who show extraordinary curiosity." Her voice softened. "I owe this idea to Lily Davis, who fixed what none of us could." The applause became thunderous. Cameras flashed again, capturing the image of a small girl standing beside a billionaire. But this time, Valeria did not feel like the star. She felt like the student. After the meeting, she found Mark in the hallway. The reporters were still crowding the elevators, calling Lily's name. Valeria placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "You should take the next few days off," she said. "Let the noise fade." Mark nodded. "I think that would be best. She has school tomorrow anyway." Valeria smiled. Then take her somewhere quiet. Let her just be a child again. He smiled back. Thank you, Miss Stone. When they left, Valeria returned to her office and sat in silence. The hum of the servers was softer now. She opened her laptop and looked at the recovered code. There, near the end of the sequence, Lily had added a single comment line. It read, "If lost, ask why." Valeria stared at the words for a long time. Then she opened a new document and typed a note to herself. From this day on, every project must begin with one question. Why does it matter? She saved the note and closed her laptop. That evening, the rain returned. Valeria stayed in her office, watching droplets race down the glass. The city lights blurred together in streaks of gold and white. For years, she had chased perfection, but now she saw that perfection was sterile. Real beauty, she realized, lived in imperfection, in the unexpected spark of a child's mind. Far away, in a small apartment across the river, Mark and Lily sat together at the kitchen table. The apartment was simple, the walls covered with her drawings. She was copying lines of code from her notebook into an old laptop. "What are you working on now?" Mark asked. "A game," Lily said. "It teaches computers to tell stories." "Stories," he said, smiling. "What kind of stories?" "Happy ones," she answered. "So machines will remember how to feel." He nodded and looked at her for a long moment. "You know, your mother would have loved that." Lily looked up. "Do you miss her, Dad?" "Every day," he said. "But tonight I think she would be proud of you." She smiled, and he reached over to brush a strand of hair from her face. Outside, the rain drummed against the window like a quiet applause. The next morning, news of the miracle spread across the world. Articles appeared with titles like "Child Prodigy Saves Billion-Dollar AI" and "Janitor's Daughter Becomes Symbol of Hope." People argued about whether it was real, whether the company had staged it for publicity, whether a 9-year-old could truly fix something so complex. But none of that mattered to Valeria or to Mark. For Valeria, it was the beginning of something new. She started arriving at work earlier, not to command, but to listen. She spoke to the cleaning staff by name, asked the interns what they were learning, and began visiting schools where she quietly funded new science programs. Her image began to change. The press called it the Stone transformation, though she knew it was really the Lily effect. For Mark, life was still modest, but lighter. He was offered a new position in the company, one that used both his technical background and his discipline. He became a systems support engineer, responsible for maintaining the software that ran Novatech's buildings. He accepted the job with gratitude and humility. Every day he carried the same quiet pride, knowing that his daughter had changed the course of their lives. As for Lily, she went back to being a child, at least most of the time. But sometimes she would look up at the clouds and wonder about patterns, loops, and questions waiting to be solved. Late one night, after she had gone to bed, Mark looked at her notebook left open on the table. On the first page, she had written a single sentence in her careful handwriting. It said, "When the world stops listening, whisper why." He smiled and closed the book. In her apartment across the city, Valeria Stone sat at her desk, unable to sleep. She opened the AURORA system once again and scrolled through the recovered data. There was a strange calm inside her now, a sense that something greater than money or power had taken root. She whispered into the quiet room. "Thank you, Lily." The servers hummed in reply, steady and strong. And in that hum, Valeria felt something she had never known before. Hope. The weeks turned into months, and Novatech began to look different. Not from the outside, where its tower still gleamed like a shard of ice above the skyline, but from within. Something invisible had shifted. The company that had once lived on deadlines and fear now carried a quieter rhythm. People smiled more often in the elevators. Teams stayed late not because they were afraid of Valeria Stone, but because they wanted to build something worth believing in. It began with small things. Valeria asked every department to create a why board, a simple whiteboard where anyone could write one question each week about what they were working on. She read them all herself. Sometimes the questions were technical, but most were human. Why does this project matter to people outside this building? Why are we afraid to fail? Why do we chase speed instead of understanding? Those questions changed everything. They reminded everyone, including Valeria, that invention without purpose was only noise. One afternoon, Valeria walked through the lab where AURORA's core had been rebuilt. The hum of processors filled the room, a steady pulse that matched the beat of her own heart. Alan Price, now humbler and more open than before, greeted her with a smile. "The system is stable," he said. "We ran stress tests all week. It is faster and smarter than ever." Valeria nodded. "And the loop," he smiled. "It never happened again. But we kept the question line in the code." She raised an eyebrow. "The question line," Alan pointed to the screen. "The one Lily wrote, 'If lost, ask why.' It is now part of every AI framework we release." Valeria smiled, a soft, proud smile she rarely allowed herself. "Good. Keep it there. Make it a rule." She left the lab and stepped into the bright afternoon light, flooding through the glass hallways. Her reflection followed beside her, the reflection of a woman who had built an empire and almost lost her soul, then found it again in a child's question. Downstairs, in the cafeteria, Mark Davis sat at a corner table, with a small laptop open. He was wearing a new badge, with his title, Systems Support Engineer. It still felt strange to him. He worked on maintenance scripts, repaired automated cleaning routes, and sometimes helped junior programmers debug their code. He never boasted about what had happened. Most people already knew. They greeted him with respect, and sometimes gratitude. That afternoon, Valeria approached his table. "May I sit?" she asked. "Of course," he said quickly, standing up. "Sit," she said, smiling. "You do not need to stand for me." They shared a quiet moment, the sound of people talking softly around them. "How are you and Lily?" she asked. "We are good," Mark replied. "She is back in school. She loves it. She wants to learn more about artificial intelligence." Valeria laughed softly. "That does not surprise me. She was born for it." She paused, thoughtful. "You know, she reminded me of myself when I was her age. I used to stay up late with my father, solving equations on napkins. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking why. I started thinking only about how and how much." Mark smiled. "Sometimes, life teaches us by breaking our loops, too." Valeria looked at him. "You are a wise man, Mr. Davis." He shook his head. "No, just a man who cleans up after broken systems." She laughed quietly. "Then perhaps that is what wisdom really is." That evening, when Valeria returned home, her penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a reflection of everything she had built and lost. She stood by the window, overlooking the river. The city glimmered below, a constellation of small lives and larger dreams. She thought about Lily, about the way that little girl's mind had seen through the noise and found truth. She wanted to do something lasting, not just for the child who had saved her empire, but for all the children who would never get the chance to show what they could do. The next morning, she made an announcement. Novatech would open a new foundation, the AURORA Initiative, dedicated to funding technology education for underprivileged children around the world. The news spread quickly. Some praised her for her generosity. Others said it was a calculated move to repair her image. Valeria ignored all of it. She knew the truth. The first AURORA Learning Center opened in Queens, not far from where Mark and Lily lived. The building was simple, but beautiful, filled with computers, books, and bright murals of stars and circuits. At the entrance, a single line was engraved into the wall. "If lost, ask why." The opening ceremony drew a crowd of reporters, but Valeria only cared about two guests. Mark and Lily arrived quietly. Lily wore a white dress with blue ribbons, her hair tied back neatly. When she saw the engraving on the wall, she gasped. "That is my line," she said. Valeria smiled. "Yes, it belongs here now." Mark shook her hand. "You did not have to do this, Miss Stone." "I did," she said. Some promises are bigger than money. They walked together through the new classrooms. Children were already sitting at the computers, eyes wide with wonder. Teachers guided them gently, helping them learn to think. not just to type. Lily sat down beside a boy who was struggling with a small coding puzzle. She looked at his screen and said softly, "Try asking why your code stops." He looked at her, puzzled, then smiled as the answer came to him. The line worked. The code ran perfectly. Valeria watched the moment and felt her heart swell. She realized that what had begun as a desperate night in a glass tower had become something much greater. Weeks later, Valeria visited the Davis apartment again. It was a small home filled with laughter and warmth. Lily greeted her at the door with a bright smile. "Come in, Miss Stone." "I made something new," she said proudly. Valeria followed her to the small desk, where a laptop hummed quietly. On the screen, an application ran with a soft voice, reading aloud a story. "Once, there was a machine who wanted to understand people," the voice said. "It asked everyone. It met one question. Why do you smile?" Valeria listened with awe. "You made this." Lily nodded. "It is an AI that tells stories for kids who are lonely. It learns how to make them happy." Mark smiled. "She calls it hope." Valeria felt her eyes grow wet. "That is beautiful," she whispered. Lily shrugged. "It is just another loop. But this one ends when the person smiles." Valeria laughed softly. "Then it might be the most perfect loop I have ever seen." That night, after dinner, they went up to the building's roof. The air was cool and smelled of rain. The city spread before them in lights and movement. Mark leaned on the railing, his hand resting on his daughter's shoulder. "You know," he said, "I still think about that night. How everything changed because you asked one small question." Lily looked up. "It was not a big question. It was big enough," Valeria said. "Big enough to change me, this company, and maybe the world." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the wind. Then Lily spoke again. "Miss Stone, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Valeria said. "Are you happy now?" Valeria turned her eyes toward the sky. For years, she had chased achievements, numbers, and victories, but none of them had ever felt like this. "Yes," she said quietly. "For the first time, I think I am." Lily smiled. "Good." Then the loop really ended. Valeria looked down at her, her heart full. "Perhaps you are right. Or perhaps it is just beginning again. But in a better way." That night, as Valeria drove home, she looked at the reflection of the city lights on her car window. She thought of the girl's words. The loop had ended. Maybe this time, it would not begin again. When she reached her apartment, she stood by the window once more. The river below shimmered with the memory of rain. She whispered into the night, "Thank you, Lily." Her voice was soft, almost lost to the hum of the city. But somewhere out there, in the endless pulse of machines and hearts, the words found their echo. A year passed, and the world outside continued to move with its usual noise and hurry. Yet inside the walls of Novatech, something had changed permanently. The company that once measured success in profits now measured it in progress and compassion. People worked not only to build better machines but also to understand them, and perhaps to understand themselves. Valeria Stone was no longer the same woman who had once stood like a queen over her frightened engineers. Her confidence remained, but it was gentler now, more human. She no longer wore perfection like armor. Instead, she carried a quiet sense of purpose, a desire to create rather than to conquer. Every morning, she began her day the same way. She walked through the lobby, greeting the staff by name, from the security guards to the cleaning team. Some of them still found it hard to believe that the powerful CEO remembered them personally. Yet Valeria had discovered that the true measure of leadership was not in command, but in connection. One Monday morning, she stopped by the system support office, where Mark Davis was working. He looked up from his computer, surprised to see her. "Miss Stone," he said with a smile. "You did not have to come down here." "I wanted to," Valeria replied. "This is where everything started, after all." She looked around the room, where engineers and technicians worked side by side, exchanging ideas. The atmosphere was open and bright. She saw that Mark's desk was decorated with small paper drawings from his daughter. Each one carried a line of simple but profound code. She pointed at one and smiled. "What is this one?" "That is Lily's latest masterpiece," Mark said proudly. "It says, 'If you feel sad, print hope.'" Valeria laughed softly. "She has a gift for turning code into poetry." Mark nodded. "She says machines should speak gently." They talked for a few minutes about small things, about work, about life. Then Valeria hesitated, as if she were weighing a thought. "Mr. Davis," she said finally, "I am planning something new. Something big. And I want your help." He blinked. "My help?" "Yes," she said. "The AURORA initiative is growing faster than we expected. We have schools opening in 3 more countries next year. I need someone who understands both technology and people, someone who has lived on both sides of the glass." Mark's eyes widened. "You mean me?" Valeria nodded. "I mean you." He shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes," she replied simply. He smiled. Then yes. When she left the room, he sat back and took a long breath. His life had never been extraordinary, yet somehow it had led him to this moment. A janitor who had once cleaned the halls of power was now being asked to help shape the future of education. That evening, he told Lily the news. She was sitting at the kitchen table, working on her tablet. When he told her, her eyes sparkled. "You are going to help build schools for kids like me," she said excitedly. "That is the plan," he replied. She smiled. "Then I want to help too." And she did. In the months that followed, Lily became the small, unofficial heart of the AURORA initiative. She visited schools with her father and Valeria, helping to test learning programs and encouraging other children to ask questions. Wherever she went, she carried her old notebook filled with scribbles, as if it were a part of her soul. Valeria loved watching her. She saw in that little girl everything she had once forgotten about herself. There was a purity in Lily's curiosity, a fearless joy in her learning. It reminded Valeria of the simple reason she had fallen in love with science in the first place. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Valeria visited Mark and Lily again. The air outside was cool, and the sound of the city was distant. They sat on the rooftop of their apartment building, sharing dinner from paper boxes. "Do you ever think about that night?" Valeria asked quietly. "The night everything changed," Mark smiled. "Every day. It was the night that reminded me that miracles can wear work boots." Lily laughed. "And carry notebooks." Valeria smiled at the two of them. She looked out across the skyline, where the lights shimmered like stars caught in glass. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think that power was about being the one who had all the answers. But now I see that it is about being brave enough to keep asking questions." Lily looked at her and said, "That is what I tell my friends. I tell them that asking why is like opening a door." Valeria turned to her. "And what is behind the door?" Lily thought for a moment. "Maybe another question." They all laughed, and for a long time, no one spoke again. Weeks later, Valeria invited Mark and Lily to the grand opening of the newest AURORA Center in California. The building was surrounded by children from every background, their faces filled with excitement. Reporters filled the space, but Valeria's speech was simple. She told them about a girl who had once asked the right question at the right time, about a father who never stopped believing in his child, and about how that moment had become the seed of something beautiful. At the end of her speech, she turned to Lily. "Come here," she said. Lily walked to the stage, shy but smiling. Valeria knelt beside her and whispered, "Would you like to say something to the world?" Lily nodded. She stepped up to the microphone, her small hands trembling slightly. She said, "I do not know much, but I know that every problem is just a story that forgot its question. If we ask kindly, the answer will find us." The audience fell silent for a heartbeat, and then applause filled the hall. People stood, clapping and cheering. Cameras flashed. But Lily just looked at her father and smiled. After the event, when the reporters were gone and the lights dimmed, the three of them sat together in the empty auditorium. The air smelled faintly of new paint and possibility. Valeria looked at them and said softly, "I never told you this, But before that night, I was close to selling the company. I had stopped believing in what I was doing. But your daughter reminded me that purpose is not built in boardrooms. It is born in hearts that care enough to ask why. Mark nodded. Maybe that is why she saw what others could not. Valeria looked at Lily and said, "Keep that question alive. Never let anyone make you afraid to ask it." "I promise," Lily said. The next morning, the sun rose over the new center, spilling light through its wide windows. Children filled the halls with laughter. Teachers guided them gently through their first lessons, and somewhere in the main server room, the new AI system hummed quietly. Its core was built on AURORA's design, but improved and gentler. At the center of its code was one familiar line, written in simple letters. "If lost, ask why." That line became more than code. It became a way of thinking, a way of living. Schools around the world adopted the AURORA model. Students learned not only mathematics and science, but empathy, curiosity, and the courage to question. Valeria continued to lead Novatech, but her mission had changed. She used her influence to fund social projects, environmental programs, and education for children in places where technology was a luxury. Mark worked by her side, running the operations of the AURORA initiative, visiting communities, and mentoring young teachers. He no longer wore a janitor's uniform. He wore simple shirts and a warm smile that carried stories of humility and strength. Lily grew into a young girl whose brilliance shone brighter with each passing year. She became the symbol of the company's new vision, but to her father, she was still just his little girl who loved to draw loops in her notebook. One quiet evening, the three of them stood together again on the roof of Novatech, looking out over the city. The sky was filled with stars, faint but real. Valeria said, "Do you know what I think, Lily?" "What?" Lily asked. "I think every person is a loop. We keep repeating the same mistakes until someone reminds us to ask why." Lily smiled. "Then I think we should be each other's gates." Valeria looked at her, her eyes shining. "That is beautiful." Mark put his arm around his daughter and nodded. "She always knows the right line of code." The three of them stood in silence, the wind moving gently through their hair, the city glowing beneath their feet. Somewhere deep inside Novatech's servers, AURORA processed its endless streams of data, pausing now and then, as if it too was thinking, remembering the night a little girl asked the question that changed everything. In the quiet hum of the machines, if one listened closely, there was a faint echo, a whisper, like a heartbeat, hidden inside the circuits. "Why?" And the system, as if smiling, always answered, "Because someone cared enough to ask."